Picture this. It's the absolute dead of night in an ancient, terrifyingly dense forest. Right above you, hanging upside down from the rotting branch of a desolate tree, is a cunning, supernatural creature, a pishacha, a vampire. And standing right below him, one of the greatest emperors of Indian folklore, King Vikram with his sword just resting casually on his shoulder. Now, he isn't here for glory, no. He's here to fulfill a very dark promise. He has to capture this ghostly being, Betal, and carry him, in absolute silence, to a cremation ground. But as you might guess, there's a catch, and it is incredibly dangerous.
Betal looks at the king and lays down the ultimate threat. "O king, if you open your mouth to speak on the way, I will fly right back to the tree." That right there, that's the rule. If the king speaks a single, solitary word, the creature vanishes, flies straight back to that eerie tree, and the whole grueling journey has to start all over again. These are the intense, high-stakes rules of the game we're breaking down today in this explainer. What looks like a physical task is actually a completely exhausting psychological marathon.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the mysterious forest and condition.
So, King Vikramaditya of Ujjain is bound by a promise to a tantric, right? He has to carry this cunning vampire, Betal, to the cremation ground without making a peep. The premise here is brilliantly manipulative. To make this silent, agonizing walk bearable, or at least that's what he claims, Betal narrates these fascinating stories to the king. But look, these aren't just your standard bedtime fairy tales. They are incredibly complex case studies in morality, justice, and human nature. At the end of every single story, Betal pauses. He demands an answer to a seemingly impossible moral riddle based on the tale. Here's the trap. If Vikram knows the correct answer and stays silent, he fails his fundamental duty as a righteous, justice-seeking king. But if he speaks to deliver justice, he breaks his vow of silence and Betal escapes. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Moving right along to Section 2, the test of sacrifice.
When we really synthesize these 25 massive concepts, a super clear, recurring pattern emerges. Betal is constantly, relentlessly forcing Vikram to weigh different, completely heartbreaking types of sacrifice against one another. I mean, he's throwing out questions like, is a king's duty greater than a commander's loyalty? Is an enlightened thief actually nobler than a generous king? These aren't just abstract, philosophical ideas floating in the ether. They are deeply personal, painful choices that involve real blood, real sweat, and true love.
To see exactly what I mean, let's look at Riddle 15. In this story, the deeply compassionate Prince Jimutvahan literally offers his own body to be eaten by a mythological eagle, Garuda. But then, a serpent named Shankchur jumps in. He tries to intervene and save the prince, risking his own life in the process. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Put yourself in the king's shoes. What would you choose? Whose sacrifice actually holds more moral weight?
Now, what's really interesting here is how completely evenly matched these two sides appear. On one hand, you have a prince offering the ultimate sacrifice, his own flesh. That seems pretty much unbeatable, right? But then, on the other hand, you have Shankchur, a serpent, offering up his own life to save a total stranger who just happens to be royalty.
Well, King Vikram doesn't even hesitate. He slices right through all of our human emotional bias to get straight to the ethical truth. He decrees that the serpent's sacrifice is actually the greater one. Why? Because a king's very definition, his inherent, absolute duty, is to protect others. Prince Jimutvahan was essentially just doing his job, albeit to a super extreme degree. Shankchur, though, he had zero obligation, absolutely none. His sacrifice was born purely out of spontaneous, unbridled compassion. Honestly, it is a stunning piece of logical deduction.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, Wisdom, Justice, and Duty.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the riddles consistently prove that sharp wits are actually a hero's absolute greatest weapon. Betal doesn't just test the heart, he is rigorously testing the intellect. Whether it's a brave woman using insane presence of mind to outsmart a thief in Riddle 13, or a scholarly man winning a princess's hand over a gigantic, burly wrestler in Riddle 7, Betal's stories demand that Vikram validate the total supremacy of the intellect over physical strength. But I've got to say, nowhere is this more bizarrely tested than in the very first riddle. Just take a moment to process this one. Seriously, wrap your head around it. In Riddle 1, two friends unfortunately have their heads severed by a demon. The grieving wife prays to a goddess and actually gets the power to resurrect them. But
In her frantic, understandable panic, she accidentally places her husband's head on his friend's body and the friend's head on her husband's body. And yep, both men come back to life. So, who in the world is the real husband now? Wild, right? It sounds like an absolute, unsolvable nightmare. But Vikram's logic is totally unshakable. He answers that the head is the ultimate seat of intellect, memory, and identity. The physical body, that's just secondary. Therefore, whichever body is carrying the husband's head is the true husband. It's just a ruthless, incredibly clear-cut prioritization of the mind over the physical form.
All right, moving on to Section 4, Fate versus Human Action.
This brings us to one of the oldest, most intense philosophical debates embedded in Indian folklore. Betal repeatedly tries to trap Vikram by presenting two very different types of characters. On one side of the ring, we have people who surrender entirely to prophecies. They truly believe their path is already written in the stars, so why fight it? But on the flip side, we have characters who fight against completely impossible magical odds, using relentless hard work to carve out their own futures. Betal basically wants to know where the great king stands on this eternal spectrum.
King Vikram's answer is intensely empowering. He firmly, without a doubt, aligns with free will. He states that human action, or karma, is always greater. Why? Because as he so eloquently puts it, without hard work, the door of fate doesn't even unlock. As we see throughout this explainer, you cannot just sit around and wait for destiny to hand you a victory on a silver platter. Human effort is the ultimate engine of reality.
Let's move to Section 5, the riddle that stumped Vikram, and see how this all builds to our climax.
For 24 grueling, mind-bending cycles, Vikram has answered perfectly. But then, Betal drops riddle 24. It is a genealogical paradox that completely, utterly shatters the established rules of the game. Get this, a father and his son come across a queen and her princess daughter. Through a very strange turn of events, the father ends up marrying the younger princess, and the son marries the older queen. Time passes. Both couples have children. Betal asks Vikram, what is the exact blood and legal relationship between those newborn children?
For the very first time all night, the brilliant king's mind just hits a brick wall. The family tree loops back on itself in this inescapable, completely chaotic knot. There is no clear, moral, or logical answer to be found. And so, King Vikram is totally stumped. He maintains complete, absolute silence. He has finally won the game of silence. Not by just stubbornly holding his tongue, but by being genuinely defeated by a paradox.
Which leads us into Section 6, the final secret and the tantric's end.
Because you see, this silence doesn't mean failure. It actually unlocks the true nature of everything we've just witnessed. Betal doesn't fly away. Instead, he speaks to the king with this deep, profound respect. He reveals the ultimate twist. Betal was never just some ghost trying to annoy the king. He was a secret ally all along. The tantric who sent Vikram on this mission, he actually intends to murder him. Betal warns the king that the tantric will ask him to bow down in reverence to the goddess, and the exact moment Vikram lowers his exposed neck, the tantric will strike.
So, the crucial point is how Vikram uses absolutely everything he's learned tonight. When he finally brings Betal to the cremation ground, the tantric, right on cue, asks the king to bow. Remembering the lessons on presence of mind and decisive action from the riddles, Vikram plays dumb. He asks the tantric to demonstrate how to bow properly. The absolute second the villain lowers his own head, Vikram rapidly draws his sword and beheads the tantric. He immediately saves his own life and rids the world of a great evil.
The resolution of this epic journey is just profoundly satisfying. Goddess Durga appears, immensely pleased that this corrupt tantric has been defeated. She grants King Vikramaditya boons of unparalleled glory and literally immortality in legend. And as for Betal, having fully fulfilled his purpose as the ultimate teacher in disguise, he returns to his eerie tree forever, leaving the king as a noticeably wiser, sharper, and truly enlightened ruler. His logic, his duty, and his presence of mind are what ultimately secured the victory.
King Vikramaditya didn't conquer the dark forest with just his sword. He conquered it by sharpening his intellect, deeply understanding his duty, and taking decisive action exactly when it mattered most. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought based on today's explainer. If Vikram defeated his ghost by facing the hardest, most impossible questions imaginable, what ghosts of indecision are still hanging on your tree? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.